Did you know that your kidneys filter about 50 gallons of fluid, which is 180 liters per day, yet 99% of that water is reabsorbed into the bloodstream for further use? It's actually incredible. And you have this guy right here, the nephron, which is located inside the kidney, to thank for it. Now, about 80% of the water is actually reabsorbed in the PCT right here, the proximal convoluted tubule, right here, part of your nephron. Today we're going to dive into the process that happens after the PCT, detailing what happens in the loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting duct. And my hope is by the end of the video you truly understand how much water is absorbed back into the body to be saved, and as well as the refinement process of urine and how it is actually created. So without further ado, we'll dive into the loop of Henle. Alright, welcome to the nephron loop, also known as the loop of Henle, and this is also known as the countercurrent multiplier, which is a super cool name. The reason it's called this is because we have two tubes here with alternating flows, okay? So we have the nephron loop, which flows in this direction. So we have the arrows, we're following the cursor, we're flowing from left to right, okay, in this diagram here. But right real close to it, we have a blood supply, also known as the vasa recta, which is close, which surrounds, this is a blood supply that surrounds the nephron, which flows in the opposite direction and carries the blood in this diagram from right to left. And so this countercurrent is extremely important in the process of how salt and water is reabsorbed back into the bloodstream for further use later. So just to orient you, we have the proximal, the PCT, the proximal convoluted tubule where the urine came in after it got filtered. We have a thick descending loop, a thin descending loop, then it transfers into the thin ascending loop, and the thick ascending loop over to the distal convoluted tubule, which we'll go over later in the video. And so in this portion, the thin ascending loop, this line I've drawn is actually a key line. It's the water permeability line, okay? So on this side of the actual nephron loop, or the loop of Henle, we have squamous cells that are located along the borders of this tube here. And this is key right here. These are not water permeable. Water cannot leave in this portion, but what can is salt. And so we see how NaCl, which we've drawn here, which is the chemical formula for table salt, is leaving the actual vessel here. And so this is where sodium actually exits the loop of Henle from the urine. So this is the yellow portion inside is the urine. Salt is now leaving, and salt is now going into the nearby bloodstream, and that's how our body retains that salt. This will be extremely salty and concentrated near the bottom of the loop, and as you go up, the concentration of salt decreases, but it still occurs, right? So even as we go into the thick ascending loop, salt will still leave this portion of the loop of Henle and get reabsorbed into the bloodstream. So the reason we started over here is the key physiological concept of water follows salt. Okay, so let's imagine we are a salt molecule. We just exited the thin ascending loop over here, and now we're in the bloodstream. So now we got to remember the bloodstream's going this way. And so we're actually going to follow the salt over here. And so we're a salt molecule. So the blood right next to this loop over here is extremely salty. And the key thing about this side of this line is that these squamous cells that line the thin descending loop and the thick descending loop are water permeable, as this says right here. And so, but salt cannot go out. And so we have a bunch of water coming out of here because due to the rule of osmosis, water always follows salt to make it equal across a gradient. So what you have here is you have a super salty blood solution over here and a not so salty urine. And so then the water's like, oh my goodness, we need to equalize this immediately. And so water just goes crazy. It comes out of the urine, and that's how we absorb the water that you drink. Even though a lot of the water did get absorbed in the PCT before, this is another key aspect on the descending side of how water gets out of the urine and we maintain it in our body. And that's part of that 99% that we actually retain of what we drink. And so now water will come out of it and then get reabsorbed into the bloodstream. Same principle, more water will be reabsorbed at the bottom of the loop because there's so much salt down here. As you go up, as you travel up, there's less salt, so there's less water that comes out, but it still occurs. And that is essentially how this whole system works, how sodium and salt on opposite sides of the loop are reabsorbed into the bloodstream for further use. So now we'll dive into the distal convoluted tubule. Alright, welcome to the distal convoluted tubule, also known as the DCT. And so we are coming here where the urine has now, we just absorbed our water, we just absorbed our salt. So what's left? We have some further refinement. Here's some cells that line the actual DCT, and these are cuboidal cells with few microvilli, just a little bit for absorption. The key players here, the all-star team right here, these green cells, that again, that we talked about earlier in our first video about the glomerulus, but these are the specialized epithelial cells of the DCT that sit right in between the afferent arteriole and the efferent arteriole that initially go into the glomerulus. So if you can imagine, the glomerulus would be right here, And this section of the DCT is called the macula densa. And again, the macula densa is really key for sensing how much sodium is in the urine to alter and to regulate the amount of blood flow that is actually going into the kidney. And so it's really essential in this process. And so we can actually dive in a little bit to the transport here going on. And so for our first one, we have sodium. And so again, we have some sodium left in our urine, and usually that can get absorbed into the macula densa cells here, part of your DCT, and it actually can get transported into the bloodstream of the afferent arteriole going into the kidney. And of course, when you have sodium leave, potassium usually comes into the cell. And so you have some potassium getting transported from the afferent arteriole into the macula densa in that case right there. In the case of CO2, it's actually similar to the PCT process where CO2 will enter the macula densa cell, combine itself with a water molecule to form carbonic acid. And if you remember from last video, the key enzyme that breaks down carbonic acid is carbonic anhydrase. So carbonic anhydrase will break this apart into H plus and bicarb, like it did again in the PCT. Just like the PCT again, the body does not like to maintain the H plus. It's too acidic, so it spits it out, right? Spits it back out into the urine, and that's again why our urine is pretty acidic. Now, it loves bicarb because it's really good and key in maintaining acid-base balance. And so what it does is actually, it wants to keep it, but it wants to put it in the bloodstream so it can be used. So the nearest vessel would be the afferent arteriole. To get the bicarb over there, though, it's a little different. It actually swaps it with some chlorine, a chloride ion, if you will, which is located in the afferent arteriole. And bicarb will go one way, chloride will go the other way, and that's called antiport when they both go in opposite directions. So two molecules are transported that way. And that's how bicarb ends up again in the bloodstream. So just like the PCT, the DCT also absorbs some bicarb as well. And just a quick little reminder here. So in the DCT, we have a little chart. What's absorbed, which was our CO2 and our sodium. And then excreted again was our H+. So that's kind of the tally that we got going on at the DCT. And then after that, the urine, after that refining process, it'll continue to the collecting duct down here. So we can go on and continue to our collecting duct. All right, welcome to the collecting duct. We will begin by talking about the key cells that are part of the collecting duct. So this is the final portion of the nephron. We're almost done. And the last part of this is the final refinement process of the urine, okay? The main cell that is located in the collecting duct is these pink guys right here called principal cells. And principal cells are responsible for, again, absorbing sodium and excreting potassium into the urine, okay? So it's making it less salty and then has more potassium. Another type of cell that's located in the collecting duct is called an intercalated cell. An intercalated cell is pretty interesting. It absorbs potassium, it absorbs bicarb, and secretes H+, making urine more acidic as well. And so those are the two types of cells that are located in the collecting duct for fine-tuning and refining of that last urine. That urine will then continue all the way down to the papillary duct, which is the end portion of the collecting duct, which has columnar cells on it, and eventually down to the minor calyx, eventually draining to the kidney and the ureter, and eventually peed out, okay? And so the last thing we want to talk about here is the hormone influence. Hormones play a massive role in sodium and water retention, and so our first hormone that we want to talk about is aldosterone. So aldosterone is produced by the adrenal glands, which are located on top of your kidneys, and it really wants salt retention. It retains your salt. You want to keep it as much as possible. So it helps your principal cells absorb more sodium, and naturally if you absorb more sodium, you excrete more potassium. So more potassium will eventually be secreted as well in the principal cell with aldosterone influence on the principal cell. And then also aldosterone also influences intercalated cells to produce more H+ into the urine, making it more acidic. ADH is our next hormone, which is called anti-diuretic hormone. The way I remember it as a student is diuretics is the med that makes you pee. So anti-diuretic doesn't make you pee. So you want to hold on to your water, okay? And so it really is all about water reabsorption. The way it does this is incredible. It actually upregulates the production of aquaporin channel proteins on the apical membrane of the principal cells. And that's what I've drawn right here. And so whatever water has left in the collecting duct as it's got to this point, and if our body is like, we haven't drank in a while and we need some water, it says, bring some more in. We need some more aquaporins. Let's get some on there. And it allows water to be transported into the principal cell to allow for more water to avoid losing water in our urine. So incredible. Just amazing. And our last one is ANP, which stands for atrial natriuretic peptide, which is produced by the atria of the heart, which is really cool. And these guys, if you look at the name natriuretic, natri meaning salt, etic meaning pee, and it really means salty pee. So you're going to get salty pee. So if salt and pee are left in the urine here, it has to actually inhibit ADH and aldosterone. It inhibits these because you want to stop aldosterone from keeping sodium, and you want to stop ADH from keeping water. So it prevents your principal cells from absorbing the sodium and absorbing the water to keep water and salt in your urine, so you actually end up getting salty urine. So it actually promotes natriuresis, salty urine. And so that's kind of the main hormone influence on the actual cells of the collecting duct physiologically. And that's how our body really maintains the water, refines the urine process, and makes sure that our urine that we produce is truly just the waste that we don't need anymore. And so I hope you guys learned something. I hope this helps. Feel free to check out some of my more videos on the channel. Please consider subscribing. It really helps me continue to make high quality videos just like this one for you guys. I am the PT Guy, educating you on God's wonderful creations. I'll see you in the next one.